tick, tock, tick, tock, tick, tock, tick, tock, tick, tock.
Like Alan Moore was quoted as saying that he doesn't, this obsession that America has with superheroes, why did all the superheroes come out of the States? And he's been sort of quoted as saying he actually views the first masked superheroes as the Ku Klux Klan. Oh. And that was something that kind of just got passed down but got reinvented many different times.
Right.
And I think this, we get back to the masks and how they're used, because it's a very kind of heavy theme in this. And it's really, really interesting for me, the way they kind of, there's the quote, which was, when a white man wears a mask, he's a hero, and when a black man wears it, he's a criminal. That's it comes into sort of hoodies and things like this. And so, I thought that was a really interesting theme for them to go on, and they explored it in lots of different ways as well. In terms of, I think the original idea of a mask is probably from religious rituals, right? You wear a mask to transform yourself to some sort of connection. And
I guess we should just briefly mention that, what happened in this alternate history is because of a few years ago in the timeline of this series, there was this attack called the White Night, coincidentally, that basically these white supremacists attacked the police in their homes and stuff like that. And so most of the force kind of quit. And then subsequent to that, I guess it's the son or the grandson of the original Keene Act that banned the heroes and stuff, went ahead and created this law that, allowed policemen to wear masks and stuff, which, come fast forward to 2020, that ironically now, we're all wearing masks and everything.
I know, that was really a strange twist of fate, isn't it? And I actually hadn't picked up on the connection between the senator and the original act in the comics. So it's good you mentioned that. I've completely missed that. But I think there's this sort of, I think masks are a really interesting idea anyway to play with, because there's this idea of we show them, with our public face, we reveal things and we hide things as well. And the masks are almost used to reveal the things that aren't socially acceptable. And I think this has a very interesting analogy with the internet and how we sort of deal with that anonymity in that. That we would say a lot of things on the internet that we wouldn't say in real life. And likewise, the social justice warrior on the internet is a product of someone trying to enact the justice that they may not want to sort of deal with in their real lives. But this kind of goes back again to something Alan Moore said, and he doesn't really understand why people, adults in particular, are so obsessed with superheroes, because he kind of feels like superheroes are there as the characters that we can vicariously enact justice on the world that we don't want to really do. And he said this, the fact that adults are obsessed with this now means that we have this apathy towards making real social change. We should actually be out there sort of trying to be like Captain America rather than just living vicariously through these movies, which I thought was an interesting take on it.
Yeah, there's definitely something to that, because we've talked a little bit before about this idea of kind of this development of kind of incels, these involuntary celibates who for the most part, a lot of them are if we had the Venn diagram, I imagine that a lot of them fit within a good chunk of the fanboy community, stuff like that, right? Where it's a really weird kind of scary statement that that part of them feeling impotent and powerless and stuff is the fact that they're not recognizing that they have the ability to kind of go out there and make a change and stuff, and for what reason, it's easier to, like you said, hide behind this identity of this kind of this arbitrary kind of community, right, that they've kind of self-identified with and stuff. And it's definitely easier to do that than to actually, like you said, go and make some changes, to, maybe approach, a girl and ask them on a date and stuff and so on.
Yeah. Massive social inequity Marvel making billions of dollars in superhero movies. It's
Ouch.
those things, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know. One other thing. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
I was going to say the other aspect about this was the comment about how, that mass, like kind of, in fact, I think it was Laurie who actually points it out that like, for the most part, just about every, each one of them, the origin story is this idea that they had some kind of trauma that they, that why they put on the mask and stuff like that. And I feel like that's part of, overall, like kind of, between the heroes in the story and stuff like that, and also like kind of, like the mask you talked about with like people hiding behind the internet and everything, is that like they are kind of hiding from some kind of trauma, whether it's, being rejected for a date or, like kind of something more serious as the kind of, maybe, somebody had assaulted them or, on and on stuff.
Yeah. And I suppose it's nothing really new. I mean, I suppose the original Spider-Man novel comics, he's pretty awkward in his normal life, but he's obviously out there sort of being, wisecracking and beating up people with the mask on. So it's, there's a long history of it, I suppose, in comics. I mean, for me, the other thing with the mask is this idea of justice and how do you actually, and I think both this and the original comics sort of address this issue. Like if you do have people running around as vigilantes, you've got no real way of administering justice for those people. They're totally outside of the law. It's just not a workable solution, really, even though it's kind of makes for cool movies and stuff. But yeah, it's and how do you apportion blame to people in masks, and it's like they said in the show, you can't tell the good guys from the bad guys. You can actually manipulate things much more easily, which I guess was the point of the Judd and Keene working together on both sides, which was a nice sort of idea. Not a nice idea, but a clever one, I would say.
Yeah, one of the earliest kind of images that comes to mind when you say that too is like that we have the typical kind of traffic stop and everything. And this is like, in fact, in the first episode, I believe that like, where it's the cop pulling, kind of somebody over or stuff like that. And it's flipped. It's like, now you have, the African-American, cop who's pulling over, like kind of a white, driver that's suspicious and stuff, who really, in the end, he really didn't have anything, he really just only had lettuce and stuff, which kind of led to other jokes down the road. But like, it's funny how it's flipping the script and stuff like that. And then also it's also this, to me, like it's such a very visual idea of like kind of, just everything kind of coming together, the alternate history, the fact that like here, masks are like kind of this way that like maybe in the past was like, how one person would hide, that was doing something unlawful stuff, but here's this cop who's, like kind of, within the law wearing a mask and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, it tells you so much about their world, that first scene, because that all the police wear masks, they don't have cell phones.
Right.
That the gun laws, gun control is now sort of being put in place, and they have to unlock their guns.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff that it tells you immediately. It's and of course the whole police interaction is recorded as well. Yeah. Which is there's a lot of stuff they tell you right now.
And now like the Rorschach is like again major spoiler. It's kind of that's like now used for these Klansmen, right, and stuff. That like in other words, it goes back to what you're saying about like we're the Klansmen, the original hooded heroes and stuff like that. And in this case, they actually that is very much the case.
Yeah, but it also sort of represents that complete absolute sort of ideal that they have that's unwavering and can't be sort of compromised with as well. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things of Redford's America, which I think are quite interesting. Like white supremacy is now basically a hate crime and is outlawed. And you've got politically mediated news, like the bit when they show the Minutemen they have this disclaimer at the beginning saying, no children whatsoever should watch this without, even with a parent, and there's going to be violence and stuff, and it's racially themed, and it goes on for like about a minute, which I thought it reminds me of the which I always find funny when I'm watching American TV, is the side effects with drugs.
That's exactly what I was going to say. May cause nausea, vomiting, like on and on, like
sleep paralysis, murdering your siblings, anything and everything in those things. It's incredible. So yeah, I think what's good is that they actually show. They don't leave it completely like, oh, it would be a utopia. They show there's this sort of somewhat grey area, that there would be a lot of backlash towards this kind of radical kind of.
Well, that was the question that I had then. Is then, in fact, what we're also saying that like that if things like right now, let's face it, in America, things have swung very much to the right. Is what portrayed also in this series then, showing that like, okay, you're going to have a backlash if you swing things too much to the left. And I almost feel like that's partially what they're saying as well. So in other words, whereas Zack Snyder very much is kind of trying to nudge things to the right, and here we are in reality very much in that direction. But I almost feel like this series is almost showing that like, like it's not necessarily great to just go, full liberal and stuff.
Yeah, it certainly seems better though for a lot of people, I would say, but yeah, it is. They very cleverly kind of almost try to make like an inverse of what America is like at the moment, which probably is why this series has upset so many people, right? But or have found fans in others. It's yeah.
Well, I guess just like one of the kind of comments is you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, and speaking of eggs,
yes,
we have very much just as many eggs as there are smiley faces in the original stuff.
I know, right? Yeah, nice segue. Yeah, and again, this is like a really interesting. Just as Zack Snyder had his, God moment, I think we're kind of having a bit of a Jesus moment in the Watchmen show. In that, you think about Easter and eggs and rebirth. Because Dr. Manhattan dies and he's reborn as an egg. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, actually, that's one thing we haven't talked about is Dr. Manhattan.
No.
In that that is probably the most kind of why does he come back?
Well, also the biggest spoiler, right? Where like kind of that, and we have to really say heavily that like do not like kind of watch the spoiler unless you watch the series. But like as far as we know, like Dr. Manhattan is on Mars and stuff like that, and then we learned that of course he's not been, and so that was one of the things that I had as a question was how did Trieu, who's like kind of this girl who's like the daughter, the unattended daughter of Adrian Veidt and stuff like that, figure out like kind of where he was and stuff like because everything else, all this major plot, right, was this this / plot device was built on the fact that like knowing like Dr. Manhattan is in Tulsa, like kind of through all of this and stuff like that. So that was a big question for me until like a little bit of go ahead.
Well, yeah, there's more than one plot hole in this series. Let's be honest. I mean, like Adrian Veidt. It's rather convenient that he keeps vials of his sperm in his office. Had he not done that, none of the story would have been possible.
Right.
Also, you can't really have a Watchmen show without Dr. Manhattan being in it in some capacity. So he has to kind of come back in some degree. And it's, I mean, I guess it was interesting that they made him a human and you didn't, you found out, well, major spoiler, that, that he was at some point. Lady Trieu, you're right. She's kind of a bit of a strange character in it because named after I want to say a famous female warrior who fought back the Chinese in, I can't remember which country it was now. Korean leader, I think she is. Yeah.
All the T's though totally reminded me of like Tesla and stuff though.
That's right. Yeah.
Saw, everywhere.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that connection. Yeah. So yeah, you're right in that she kind of can somehow send. I mean, it would have taken a long time to send a probe to Europa, You know, she couldn't have just kind of like thread.
Right.
I don't know quite how many years it would take, but it'd take a long time to get a probe to there. And
also to kind of send the rocket to, you know, to get what's called Adrian back and stuff. You know, that's no small trip as well.
No, something tells me she would have had to have sent that rocket when she was like 10 or 12 or something like this. But yeah, I mean, it is this kind of thing. Like, how does she know that he's there, and why does it take her so long to find him? I don't know. It's kind of like, I'm just because this is a TV show rather than a movie. If this was a movie, I'd like pick it apart. But as it's a TV show, I'm just going to say maybe they'll address that in season 2 if they know what's good for them. That's the advantage of being a TV show. You can take the criticisms of this season and you can kind of try and backfill them to keep people quiet next season. So,
apparently David Lindelof's attitude though is that he's done. Like, kind of, you know, he may pass things off to another, you know, kind of showrunner stuff, and then maybe stay on as a producer. But he said that he put everything, you know, like all his good ideas over the past couple of years, and then, you know, a lifetime of being a fan of Watchmen into this season and stuff like that. So it's interesting how, because as a you know, somebody who enjoyed the series and stuff, it almost feels like they kind of have to have a season 2. But on the other, you know, like, kind of, I mean, I have to admit that I thought that, like, it's pretty complete as is. It's a pretty standalone, you know, like, you do feel like kind of it opened up a lot of questions and stuff like that, and then tied it up, you know, even with the holes and stuff like that, in a very satisfying way and everything.
I mean, I kind of like this approach to making sequels as well. I like this idea that, you know, you've put a lot of good ideas into it. Maybe it doesn't tie together 100%. But it's pretty good. It's a pretty decent show, right? And it's just like, you know, you're already going up against an almost unadaptable comic that was really highly praised, and you've done a TV show that's pretty decent. I would say just leave that alone for a little while. Let those ideas come stew and make some really good ones before attempting this again.
Right.
Because, you know, guarantee, I mean, even some of my favorite TV shows like Westworld, you know, they don't get better. They always get slightly worse every season, in my view, anyway. So yeah.
I feel like kind of the one master of that has been like Vince Gilligan, and we kind of keep going back to him and stuff. But I think it's that idea though, like, you know, I'm going to have a set number of seasons in mind. I'm going to write my story based on that and stuff. And that'll be it. And to, you know, from what I understand, he didn't really have everything figured out, but he kind of had, I think, some ideas, and also at least the overall structure kind of in mind and stuff like that. And I think that's kind of like what you kind of have to do when, you know, as a creator and stuff like that. And rather than like kind of, you know, let kind of the studios drive you or the fans or, you know, anything else, because like I think there's just too much that kind of goes into it. And then I feel like, you know, as we'll kind of go into with like the Star Wars series and stuff at some point, it just kind of creates a lot of like, you know, creations by committee, which just generally speaking, don't turn out very well.
Yeah, and I would say this didn't have that vibe of, you know, there was enough quirkiness and humor and surreal moments that made me think, oh, this has got, you know, it's got a real life of its own, which I really sort of appreciated. The other thing I forgot to mention as well was this idea of the Cyclops, you know, being used as, you know, it's basically the media being used for black on black violence, basically was kind of the theme I saw with that. That was a pretty, it was a fairly on your nose kind of analogy, but that was one that I couldn't help sort of noticing.
Well, I guess I should describe a little bit that, like, you know, apparently, you know, one of the things that Will Reeves discovers is this plot to use, like, kind of this, you know, psychological, you know, technology called mesmerizing and stuff that they actually, like, you know, it's funny how, like, on one hand, you can see a little bit of the actual science of it that, like, you know, that this talk about, like, kind of subconscious messages through films and stuff like that. But the other, like, you know, it's also clearly fiction because, like, it's the people really acting out, you know, super violently based on just watching, like, these subliminal messages that, like, as far as I know, like, you know, nobody's kind of created technology to that extent that, like, you can have people, even if you're hypnotizing them, to act in ways beyond what they would, ever normally do and stuff like that. But it did make for a story, and then also, like you said, as a metaphor for, the media kind of, different times, like very much, creating just a similar effect and stuff like that.
Yes, a metaphor, not an analogy. I often get that one wrong. But yeah, I've actually done a lot of in my sort of research into the edges of what's scientifically acceptable. I did a lot of research into hypnotism. And yeah, I think from everything I've read, you can't actually make people go against their basic kind of moral judgments with hypnotism. Right. Likewise, I don't think you can bottle memories either and pass those on either. So, there's some very kind of interesting ideas of, very out there scientific things, but used for story metaphor in this, which I kind of like that. But
but yeah, if we can send rocket ships to Mars overnight and stuff, and
absolutely,
so heck, I kind of a lot of this stuff is like pretty tame by comparison.
Yeah, the other thing I did like was this. I mean, the whole idea of lithium being, because it's associated with Dr. Manhattan.
Oh, right.
And of course he's blamed for giving people cancer.
Yes.
No one wants to put lithium in anything. Which, and I think I mentioned this before, there's this idea that, maybe in 60, 70 years, we may run out of lithium and we may not have any kind of substitute for it for battery technology, which would be really interesting. But we could be faced with a future not unlike we see in Watchmen, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was like kind of, pretty cleverly done, though, that like, you, unless you kind of knew about the connection of lithium and stuff like that, all you saw was like kind of, all these watches being, basically de-batteried and stuff. And, it's kind of like, I think overall what this series does well is kind of create like this kind of mystery without like kind of, like what you typically see in a lot of shows is like there's a lot of exposition, a lot of like, like kind of, gee, I wonder why, like they're putting batteries, and then, it's explained and stuff like that. Whereas in this show, like it kind of really gave you credit for being an intelligent audience and basically like kind of just showed you things, and you kind of had to like connect the dots as you went along. Because another thing that like I didn't really connect was like the whole squid thing in their universe until, of course, it's finally revealed and stuff. Because again, I came from the background of like having watched the movie and that it was a nuclear attack, and I didn't know about the squid thing and stuff until like kind of that was revealed over the course of the story and everything, that like that was the actual attack, and that was like kind of what impacted everything. Because one of the things I noticed on the second watching was you start seeing like kind of there's squid posters in the kids' classroom and just like all these other things that you notice only the second time around and stuff. And like, in other words, it was just hidden in plain sight. That's another kind of key thing I think that they really did well in the series.
Yeah, a lot of attention to detail, a lot of stuff that you're on rewatching you notice. And I it's a great avenue to explore this whole idea of trauma with different characters as well. It's like you've got Angela's trauma, you've got Looking Glass's trauma. They haven't, maybe they'll do Red Scare and Jen, I think I want to say that her name is. But, it's they and the one that I guess they didn't really explore some of the more established characters like Laurie and Dr. Manhattan to some degree. But yeah, it's a great tool for that, I would say.
And then the one character I think we should briefly mention is like the assistant to Laurie.
Yes,
is this guy called Petey, which it's funny that like I thought that was her nickname for him, but apparently that's his actual last name or something like that. And one thing I didn't catch the first time in the first watching was that the Lube Guy is actually Petey and stuff. That totally no pun intended, slipped by me the first time stuff.
Yeah, I guessed it was him, but I thought Lube Guy was another really sort of funny, completely random scene. I really enjoyed that. That was quite an interesting invention. And that's actually one of the things in more kind of experimental or daring comics, they come up with sort of characters that are just completely useless or so that's sort of going back to the original, I think, source material to some degree.
I think overall, like kind of as we've kind of said, the series really hit some, great notes that kind of resonate with the original graphic novel, the source material and stuff. And then, I think that like it just explored it in a more relevant, interesting way that that I feel like kind of, in the original movie, they kind of just really just kind of glossed over. Like they on the one hand, they did the shot by shot, but I feel like that's what, the missed opportunity was to kind of take a fresher interpretation and something that was maybe more relevant in 2009, which I think that's also an interesting time period, because that was many years after 9/11, but yet still relatively fresh in our minds and stuff like that. And I feel like that's kind of like what they didn't do, was like kind of just tap into it all, like kind of the zeitgeist or the things that were on people's mind at that point and everything. But then again, maybe like overall, people were just ready in some ways to move on, and like kind of, they just wanted some escapism, I guess, with their popcorn and stuff.
Well, I mean, I think it was too early, really, because the superhero movie hadn't really come into its own properly. So some of the more, he made it ultra violent to make it an adult movie, which was what he talks about, him being Zack Snyder, as his sort of satirical take on superhero movies, and that you never see bones getting broken and all this kind of stuff. So that was quite interesting, but it's not as interesting, I would say, as having a real subversion. And maybe there simply hadn't been enough superhero movies to subvert properly at that stage. But overall it just takes itself too seriously, and the useless heroes are far too useful in it. So I can't, as I say, it's interesting from fanboy of the comics perspective, but it's not really what I'd call a really good movie version of it. And I kind of prefer the TV version, as you said, like as a reimagining rather than an adaptation of it. So
definitely. And I don't know if we want to kind of cover this at this point, but we were talking about the Incredibles as a alternative, unofficial remake of the series and stuff. So again, to give a little bit of background, Incredibles, of course, is the Pixar superhero story that basically, brings into this idea that, like, once again, we have the heroes being banned by their world and stuff like that. And meanwhile, at the core of the story, though, besides this major kind of plot, is how does a modern day family deal with the crises of day-to-day life and manage to kind of still save the world and stuff, and like where the pressure on them is to kind of fit in and to kind of basically hide in plain sight and stuff. So Craig T. Nelson is the voice of Mr. Incredible and stuff, and he's like kind of the very much the stand-in for the male midlife crisis who's had the glory days as a superhero, and now he's got to be a breadwinning dad that working in an insurance company, which I think that's a funny kind of connection, I guess, to us. And we'll definitely look forward to kind of your thoughts on that.
I mean, there's a bit of night owl in me, definitely. And a bit of Mr. Incredible as well. And I think that he's definitely somewhat of an interpretation of Night Owl, in that his Night Owl's glory days are past him, and he's trying to sort of trying to nostalgic for the past and trying to sort of get the heroics back, and doesn't feel complete or functional as a human being without behaving as a superhero. I mean, it's and there's also this sort of thing of mediocrity, and I mean, I guess the main kind of message that Pixar's putting across is that you have to authenticity. You have to sort of be your authentic self, because that's your superpower. And trying to sort of lead a mediocre life, you'll probably be fairly miserable. Was the overriding kind of message I got from it. But I mean,
Well, I mean, that's the tension, right? Like that they have to blend in, because like even the kids, as it turned out, have, inherited, unique kind of super, powers and stuff. But meanwhile, because the supers are now illegal and stuff like that, and they're trying to just, they've already moved apparently a few times, and then now they're at a new place, and they're trying to just basically, have the kids go to school, pretty much, like live a life and not like kind of, just basically have the neighbors kind of have a mob or lynch mob coming to them and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was actually a really interesting similarity with Watchmen in that, it's the effects of particularly Mr. Incredible destroying buildings, and there's so many lawsuits against all of the superheroes that it basically makes them defunct. But there's this idea that rather than society saying in Watchmen that you can't really bring these people to justice because they're hiding behind masks, in this one it's like you can bring them to justice and you can sue them to the point where there's no point in being a superhero anymore, which I thought was a really interesting take on it. But it revisits this idea, what would a realistic sort of interpretation of if people had superpowers, again, it would be fairly dysfunctional. They'd be destroying things. It would be a bit of a disaster. So yeah, it's similar in that respect, definitely.
And meanwhile, like they're, here we again we have Holly Hunter as the voice for Elastigirl, who's the mom, who's like very much like kind of the voice of like, hey, let's like kind of just hold the household together. Let's have she just wants to have a husband that comes home to her safely at each night and stuff. And meanwhile, she wants healthy, happy kids. She just, in other words, wants to have a very ordinary life and stuff. And then meanwhile, like, what we find is that like, that like in some ways, when you have these abilities, it's almost like you can't, in the sense that like, here you have like not only the desire to kind of do something more and stuff like that, never mind, Mr. Incredible, but also even like, Dash, the kid who's like a super fast runner, he wants to just, like kind of, he wants to just at least like kind of, get second place. He's saying like, he's begging to like, like at least to use some of his ability, and because that like isn't even a fraction apparently of his kind of superior powers and stuff. But the thing is though that like as kind of the one quote I love is like what Bob says as Mr. Incredible, it's psychotic that like when she's talking about like kind of oh, you're gonna miss the graduation to 5th grade, and he's saying they created new ways to celebrate mediocrity, and that like this idea that like that's what our world kind of does, is that like not only do we want people to kind of like everyone to that we're looking to kind of chop off the tall poppies and stuff, but also that like we're celebrating these kind of like really ridiculously like expected things, right? To go from 4th grade to 5th grade,
Oh yeah, God! Whenever I see sort of iPad games designed for kids, where it's just like just keep tapping the screen and things keep flashing and you get rewards and everything, I'm just saying, oh God. But I mean, but as a counterpoint to that, though, you can sort of say, in some respects, he's kind of like Rorschach in that he has his, he has his ideals that, he has absolute moral ideals that crime has to be fought at every opportunity, regardless of the consequences, which his family often pays the price for because he's had to move several times.
Right.
And he feels like his abilities make him superior to everyone else, and he can dole out justice as he sees fit, which is one of the key kind of dysfunctions of all the characters in Watchmen. So in some respects, yeah, you can look at it in both ways, really, if you want to take a more negative view of Mr. Incredible.
Yeah, I mean, for him to like just sneak out of the house to quote unquote go bowling with Samuel Jackson as Frozone and stuff like that, it's really like kind of he's putting his family at risk, like you said, for this ideal. But in reality, it's like kind of, I mean, on the one hand, he is like kind of saving like kind of these people from this fire and stuff like that. But the other, it's also putting his family at risk and stuff. So it was like that. That's really, you know, like a huge tension. And then ultimately, what's funny is that like, you know, being, you know, kind of a little bit seduced, right, by this, in which we should probably definitely get into like kind of this, the kind of overarching plot that like kind of is happening besides like kind of this family drama and stuff like that. You know, apparently like as the origin story of Buddy, you know, who's later known as Syndrome, here's like kind of this kid who wants to, you know, kind of be his sidekick and then, you know, like kind of his Robin, I guess, to his Batman and stuff. But then meanwhile, he rejects him, and then because of that, it ends up, you know, again, major spoiler, ends up being kind of this kind of wannabe turned into villain and stuff like that. And you know, as it turns out that like that's like kind of who is behind this plot to not only get rid of, you know, Mr. Incredible, but all the supers and stuff. So then ultimately he can, like, I guess, sell his devices to kind of, you know, basically like an Adrian Veidt, just, you know, kind of rule the world with for profit and stuff.
Oh yeah, he's a total sort of Adrian Veidt style character in that. I mean, the only difference is that Adrian Veidt doesn't have any real sort of personal vendetta against the other sort of characters. But yeah, I mean, he hasn't got any real superpowers. He uses his own ingenuity to sort of engineer the elimination of other superheroes and his own kind of end, which again, the absolutist kind of mentality that his way is the best way and he's superior and doesn't have to sort of abide by anyone else's laws or anything. So yeah, he's a very similar kind of character to Adrian Veidt, and actually in a way his thing of whereas Adrian Veidt wants to get rid of all of the government superpowers to sort of level the playing field or bring them together, he wants to get rid of any kind of superpowers or any superheroes to level the playing field. So similar but slight sort of difference. Also, I would say the other sort of twist on it is that whereas you've got the individual superheroes trying to overcome their particular traumas and sort of claim their own sort of mark in how to sort of become heroes. In this one, it's sort of they have to overcome their own kind of emotional disengagement within the family. It's their emotional engagement with each other sort of actually makes them more effective as superheroes. The more they kind of work as a team and a family, that's what sort of drives them to actually being effective, I'll say.
Yeah, I mean, even though that like we don't have you know, social media being like, you know, like we don't have like the family all each on their own devices and stuff like that, but I almost feel like you know, that disengagement is very much kind of like just, you know, what we see nowadays of like we're, you know, whole families each on, you know, their smartphones / iPad / you know, so you know, that engagement, you know, like kind of at one point you know, what's called that Elastigirl actually says like kind of, you know, Bob, you know, engage, like, you know, like you see telling him like snap out of it, like kind of, you know, because he was just basically like just so fixated on cutting the steak, I guess, and stuff, and you know, very much like kind of just going along, yeah, sure, like kind of, you know, like, but very much disengaged and everything, very much like the way people are, you know, when they're on, you know, like kind of their device and everything.
Yeah, and I mean in Watchmen, you know. Silk Spectre 2 trades, you know, the disengaged Dr. Manhattan, who's completely removed from society for the night, who's kind of completely into her and actually doesn't care about the rest of the world.
Right.
So she's looking for that kind of engagement, and in this one, it's, you know, she's looking from a husband who is completely removed and searching for his glory days to someone who's actually involved and looking out and with his family, I would say. But in terms of what you're saying about engaging with the family, that comes heavily into play in The Incredibles 2 with Screenslaver, because everywhere in that movie there's screens and everyone's being hypnotized by screens and people are getting distracted by it, and that's kind of like the overriding message is that, you know, we're you know, a screen culture is going to be no good. for families or society in general, and it will actually, it will start to control your behavior, which is another interesting thing, and an interesting sort of statement in terms of a movie, a very bold statement to make, a bit like Scrooged, in that it breaks that fourth wall, in that saying, you're sitting here watching this movie, and it's you're kind of probably not engaging with your family while you do it. Likewise, Scrooge kind of said, you're here watching this movie, you should be out going celebrating Christmas. Right. So it's it's an interesting kind of fourth wall nudge there.
I think for me, like, part of the fourth wall is this idea that when you see the scenes for the final battle and everything, that's very much like downtown Oakland by Lake Merritt, which is like right by the headquarters of Pixar and stuff like that. Like, kind of just it's a matter of only maybe like 10 minutes drive or stuff like that. So it's funny how, like, the streets you see, if you're from that area, you very much know, like, San Pablo Avenue versus, like, kind of, the different ones and stuff like that. So I thought that's, like, kind of, and I don't think that they've done that with any of the other movies and stuff like that. So it's funny how this particular one, they actually, show, like, kind of, the local area, like, kind of, and it's just very, like, clear, like, kind of, that, like, when you see that water, you can almost, like, kind of just transpose, like, the scenes that you see around Lake Merritt to the shots that they have.
Yeah, it's interesting that they said that, as you said, they haven't done it with any other Pixar movie that I can think of, really. No. I mean, the only other one I could think where you could even do that would be like Up, but it's not very clear where that is. But
right.
Yeah. That's interesting. I guess the guys who work at Pixar probably see themselves as superheroes, I guess. So.
Oh, no doubt.
Rightly so, I guess.
I mean, I mean, when you get down to it, right, the whole idea of, like, kind of fitting into average and stuff like that is really, like, kind of, just looking at, I mean, besides work and stuff, it's the school system. And one of the things that, like, somewhat related is, Ken Robinson, right, who in his TED Talk talks about this idea that, like, schools are very much, designed from the industrial era to have, kind of cogs that fit this industrial machine and everything. Whereas, like, nowadays what's really needed, especially in the information age and, beyond and stuff, is people who can not only synthesize information, but also, like, be able to make creative kind of, leaps to kind of basically have ways to kind of, really process it and stuff. So, that's something that, like, just isn't, if anything, it's almost, like, I wouldn't say frowned upon, but it's like, just almost in some ways discouraged in the industrial education and stuff.
Yeah. I think as well, there's also a product of a very kind of rigid scientific way of learning that has pushed more kind of natural curiosity about specifically, I guess, more science-based sort of subjects to the point where you're just processing data. Yeah. The more naturalistic study of biology might be sort of, you might be inspired from looking at structures of leaves or how the wings on insects are, but that whole sort of visual appreciation, or the more, you could almost say, the artistic side of science is actually kind of left behind fairly quickly in schools, and it just comes down to sort of data crunching. Like there was sort of story I heard where there was a talk on an outdoor viewing by an astronomer, and someone, this guy said, "Oh, this would be really interesting to go and see because I'm interested in looking at the stars, appreciating the heavens, the different things." And he said, "Oh, what's that constellation up there, Cindy?" And the astronomer said, "Oh, I have absolutely no idea. I just get my data streamed from the Hubble telescope and I just crunch that." He doesn't even look at the sky most of the time.
Wow.
So, and I think there's, that's something that's lost. And that's probably why a lot of people always feel they need to do something creative, because our society moves a lot of jobs in an industrial data crunching kind of direction a lot of the time.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, like, kind of, processing and data crunching, going back to, Mr. Incredible's job as an insurance processor. So,
yes.
I mean, I'm kind of curious your take, kind of, having worked in that industry and stuff like that.
Yes.
Like, I mean, without saying anything that would get you fired, I guess, and stuff.
Yeah, well, luckily I don't deal directly with it in terms of the primary insurers, and
Right.
and I don't really do any of the deals or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, it's a very strange environment, insurance, because I've heard sort of people talking about how hospitals they do reinsurance, and they, you have this very morbid sort of calculation of how many people are going to die from surgeons messing up this year, and you have to kind of offset that in terms of damages and everything else. So it's, or how many people are going to get killed by a volcano, and you have to, it's a very sort of human life as data approach to working with numbers. We'll put it that way.
And I guess, like, to put it into casino terms, right, where, different times, right, they, as a house, so to speak, have to win, like in the sense of like, in the end, they have to make money. So then that way everybody's insured. So I get that, like kind of, on the other hand, though, it's, like kind of the actual people making the implementation and stuff, here we have, like kind of, Bob, who's like, trying to help this little old lady, right? Like kind of, like it's like almost like the classic trope of like, that like this little lady like kind of just wants to get her money to kind of, for this claim to kind of, for medication she needs or whatever, like, I mean, that's almost like kind of just classic and everything like that. And meanwhile, like kind of, he has to like whisper, like, well, you didn't hear from me, but you need to go to, such and such room and file such and such form and stuff. And I forget the name of the manager, but like, and then, another kind of trope is this manager who's like, what are you doing? Like, you're disrupting, our patterns and our, profitability and, on and on and stuff like that, until he finally just kind of has had it and like kind of, just basically gets himself fired by, nailing the guy.
The walls. Yeah. Well, I think that's, that sort of sums up this frustration. Again, we go back to this idea of superhero movies as a venting force for our apathy. I'm sure there's lots of us who would like to do that. I think it captures that very, very well in Mr. Incredible's sort of role as an insurance salesperson or.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it can very well be like, IT or anything else, right? Like, it doesn't have to necessarily be insurance. That's for sure.
Yeah. No, I don't think it's just anyone who's having to deal with stuff and can't get out of that, can't actually excel in a particular thing and are forced to sort of do fairly menial stuff. Yeah.
One thing I think also kind of worth mentioning is Brad Bird, who's actually one of the creators and stuff. He's actually the voice of Edna, who's like, just like a unforgettable character, and apparently she's actually modeled after this famed costume designer from Hollywood and stuff. So so it's kind of like a little bit of like kind of art imitating life, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, Edna's quite an interesting character in that. I mean, and that's actually another kind of a more lighter theme of like Watchmen explores, like what were the realistic implications of being a superhero, and you've got the whole no capes thing, which it's kind of funny, but also kind of dark in that that young girl died in an engine turbine, and also, this whole thing of monologuing as well. Like, there's the conversation between Mr. Incredible and Frozone where they're saying, oh yeah, the guy was monologuing and he, whilst he was doing that, I then went and sort of beat him up or something.
Right.
But, and actually that's one thing I wanted to go back to with what was clever about the Watchmen comic is that the whole last sort of chapter of it has got Adrian Veidt telling everyone his plot whilst he's beating them up, and it lasts pages and pages while he's kind of explaining the whole thing, and you're kind of expecting it under any other superhero movie for them to stop it right at the last second, but then he kind of goes, yeah, so guys, I did that like half an hour ago. And I mean, it's really funny when you're reading it, but I guess it's difficult it's a missed opportunity in the movie, I think. But they kind of subtly kind of pick up on it in The Incredibles, I think. So.
Definitely, and it's overall like fits into this idea that like Watchmen, like kind of at its heart is about subversion, right? Of the tropes of the things that like we typically see in these, superhero movies and the comics and stuff. That like, and I think that's, like one of the key things of what, The Incredibles really taps into is just the idea of how to do it in a very, light, kind of way. And it's kind of, I mean, the like you said, the part with the capes was just hilarious. Like, I mean, it's definitely one of the moments that you can't forget anytime soon.
Yeah, and for me, the best subversion of the Incredibles is actually their Dr. Manhattan, which is Jack, the baby,
right?
Because Jack can do practically anything.
Yes.
And because but instead of him being like this sort of slightly removed sociopathic adult who walks around naked, he's a baby who walks around naked. Right. But because he's a baby, he's not connected to the rest of humanity. So he just does whatever he does at any one time. And again, like his actions are not necessarily predictable, or they may be preordained, who knows, but he's kind of like the cute Dr. Manhattan in this story, which I thought, I don't know if they ever planned it to be that way, but I thought if they did, it's very clever.
And also, there's apparently, I guess, a I don't even know what you call it, but like it's not outtakes, but it's like a whole separate reel with the let's call it Jack and the babysitter and stuff. It's hilarious. I only watched it like maybe once and stuff, but it's just that they really kind of explore like kind of the like what happens like kind of that night with the babysitter, because we only get glimpses of it that because apparently like kind of Elastigirl's like kind of listening to messages and hearing like kind of really strange things that the babysitter is saying, and then but apparently like kind of this video, the separate video, like really actually shows a lot of that happening and stuff.
Yeah, I think there's an argument to be made that perhaps Dr. Manhattan is sort of regressing a little bit back to an infant, in that young kids they're just about their immediate demands, and everything else they don't really have any knowledge or care about it. They just want to sleep, or they want to eat, or they want to, in this case, blast things with their laser eyes or disappear. And in Dr. Manhattan you kind of feel like I don't really want to have to deal with like saving the world, but I quite like to have sex with her. It's almost like I kind of feel there's a bit of that, and he's just like, oh yeah, I want to go and play on Mars or Europa. I don't really want to have to deal with these humans. It's you could maybe interpret it that way, perhaps.
Definitely. So what's called coming up? We've definitely have some plans to look at some J-horror, and we'll be doing that for the month of October, and then of course we'll finally take a look at the Brave New World. That's a series that we've been definitely wanting to kind of tap into and stuff like that. So once again, I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds, and thanks for watching, and we will catch you next time.